The sitting is now resumed. Honourable Member for St. Andrew.
Mr. Speaker, the resolution before this House seeks permission for the compulsory acquisition of 8 parcels of land measuring 3,685.5 square meters of land, which is approximately 39,670 square feet at round the town, Speightstown, St. Peter, for the continuation of the Speightstown flood mitigation project, known as the Salt Pond Drainage Improvement Phase 2 project. Mr. Speaker, under the Speightstown Rehabilitation Project, outline designs were prepared for the main drain through Salt Pond from immediately downstream of the culvert under the Speightstown bypass to the sea outfall based on proposals in the 1996 Drainage Study Report. The proposed drainage improvements, inclusive of the retention storage scheme proposed on the main tributary upstream, was based on a 1 to 10 year to 15-year storm projection. The Ministry of Public Works considered that the culvert under the Speightstown bypass would continue to adversely impact flooding upstream and would therefore require an improved drainage area under the Speightstown bypass. A pilot project was carried out upstream in the drainage system, discharging through the Salt Pond as a step in the process the consideration of retention storage facilities in the upstream area. The Salt Pond drainage improvement is being implemented through the Barbados Tourism Investment Inc. Phase 2 of the project, or rather Phase 1, which started from the coastline under the area, or rather near to the Fisherman's Pub, to the Speightstown bypass, was completed in 2005. The Barbados Tourism Investment Inc. has obtained a loan from the Caribbean Development Bank to finance Phase 2 of the project in the sum of $4.6 million US dollars. The component from the Barbados Tourism Investment Inc. would be $560,000. DLN Consultants Inc. has been contracted to administer the contract, and they have submitted the preliminary design services for the area. The design proposal includes demolition and rebuilding the bypass culvert and the addition of a new culvert south of the existing round the town culvert to provide increased drainage flow capacity. In order for the project to begin, it is necessary that government acquire the lands under consideration. Cabinet has agreed to that acquisition. The relevant notices were published in accordance with the Land Acquisition Act. The 8 property owners, Perfect Gems Properties Inc., 1,033.2 square meters. Helena Husbands, 278 square meters. Sarah Descartes, 380.9 square meters. Saul Antilles, 334, or rather 679.4 square meters. Birdwalker, 334.7 square meters. Edwin Rollock, 34.5 square meters. Mill Reef Company Limited, 325 square meters. And Kelman Walcott, 618.8 square meters. The compensation has been agreed with the relevant owners, amounting to just under $1 million. Funds are available in the Ministry of Housing for the acquisition, and it is hoped that the settlement of the compensation will be done very shortly. It is interesting to note that this acquisition, or rather this project, is in response to the flooding which normally occurs in the Spicetown area over the years. And this project should have been completed for some time, but I cannot really explain what are the circumstances which prevented this project from being completed before. But I think that it is very well known now that constituencies which were not the purview of the last government obviously suffered, and a number of projects which should have been completed were not. Speaking to this project, which is a St. Peter project, and as you know, this is a constituency that was represented by the Barbados Labour Party for some time. I would hope that the same speed with which we've been able to bring this project to fruition, at least with the acquisition process, we might be able to do the same with the damage that was done during the bad weather in 2014 to the residents of Whitehill. Mr. Speaker, with those few comments, I beg to move that this resolution do now pass.
I remember for St. Michael West.
Mr. Speaker, while obviously I would not want to say anything that would in any way suggest that I'm not supportive of this effort, make it clear that I am. Know that this is for the purpose of facilitating drainage, etc. So on the subject of drainage, and though it be more so with reference to the responsibility of the Honourable Member of Christchurch West, I certainly want to again put on record we have a problem with drainage, serious problem with drainage at Greenwich Road, Hines Bay Road. There have been some attempts on the part of the ministry since the Honourable Member has been there to look at the problem. The problem persists, and I don't think a solution has probably been found. This is a persistent flow just off the Clygollop Centre into the area at the back of the centre, across Greenwich Road, and into that basin that leads into Headley Land. And I certainly want to put on record again that we need to have this addressed. Not only is the stench of sewage on the road nauseating, but the whole place becomes very unsightly and sometimes very difficult to traverse, especially if you're a pedestrian. So I want to draw that drainage issue to the attention of the Honourable Minister. I've also written to him with reference to Bridge Gap, where we have a deep exposed canal that facilitates the runoff of water, but which, in my view, presents a significant threat to life and limb of pedestrians and to the passage of motor vehicles. I also, while I am on my feet and following what the Honourable Member of St. Andrew just said, many projects left undone by the last administration, would want to mention that while we were, and I say while we were last, yes, while we were last in administration, up to 2008, we were able significantly to address the flood problems at Headley Land. There's no place in Barbados which was more notorious for its potential for flooding and the actuality of real serious flood problems than Headley Land. And in a phase one of 2 phases, the party in office then addressed that problem substantially with major canal works running from Roebuck Street right back to the bottom of Taylor's Gap. That covers a great deal of Bank Hall and Hinesbury Road. But it was a phase 2 conceptualization of the project extending beyond the bottom of Advent Avenue and Taylor Gap, right across Skeet Road and into places like Mears, the bottom of Mears Gap, Downey Gap, etc., Pavilion Road. You're familiar with these areas, Mr. Speaker. You defend a lot of poor and otherwise defenseless people from these areas, and I thank you for that. These are St. Michael West people, and I simply want to put on record that those matters remain unattended, especially phase 2 of the Headley Land Canal project. I thank you.
Honourable Member for St. Peter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would obviously want to support the resolution tabled by the Honourable Member for St. Andrew. And we are talking about the Salt Pond Drainage Improvement Phase 2. I call it the Spitestown, but it is also referred to as the Spitestown Flood Mitigation Matter, or project that is being addressed with the acquisition of these parcels of land as explained by the Honourable Member, the Minister with responsibility for housing. The drainage issue in Spitestown goes back pretty far, and this Barbados Labour Party is probably most familiar with 1984, because the flood did some damage, and I think it would be fair to say that the saying that goes behind every dark cloud there is a silver lining was evident in the flood of 1984. Dark cloud because I think one person lost his life, and I think, as far as I remember, but many houses damaged, some destroyed. So it was a tough time for the residents of around the town, Gills Terrace, and some of the neighboring areas, Church Street, in Spitestown, Queen Street as well. The silver lining is that out of it, I think the people of Barbados recognize that there was a possibility of sending to Parliament someone who could change the course of history of the country. And I speak of my predecessor, the former Right Honourable Member for St. Peter. There have been a number of flood events over the years since then. And these events have caused significant damage and significant anger, in some cases, to the people, not just businesses and homeowners, but normal residents in the constituency and in the area. These floods have produced material damage, but they have also impacted in a very serious psychological way on a number of persons who live in the area. And I'll relate one or two experiences from the last event in August of 2017. One lady living in Gills Terrace just off Church Street was awakened. No, she was at home, her husband was at work, and she was at home with their 2 sons. She was laying in her bed, her children were asleep. And she was awakened when she felt that she was lying down in water. Water had reached to the top of the bed, and she got up in panic, and it affected her for a number of weeks after that event. Similar experiences were had by other persons living in the area, Gills Terrace and around the town. And those persons were psychologically impacted for quite a while. So that up to this point, when the residents around the town in Gills Terrace on Church Street hear rain begin to fall, they start to panic because they do not know how hard it is falling, where it is falling upstream, and how it will impact them in terms of not just materially in terms of their houses and their possessions, but also in terms of their own personal safety and the safety of their children. So that last event in 2017 affected people significantly. And I agree with the Honourable Member for St. Andrew when he indicated that Speightstown, well, St. Peter generally, and the constituencies that are seen to be not supportive of the Democratic Labour Party are systematically neglected whenever the Democratic Labour Party is in office. That is not how the Barbados Labour Party operates. And I would want to say to the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Member for St. Michael West, that St. Michael West will not be neglected, even though he sits in opposition to this government. I say it to him not because he doesn't know, because he once walked with us. He understands the ethos of the party. I say that really to say to the country that that is not how the Barbados Labour Party operates. We are not going to leave anybody behind. But the people of Speightstown have suffered because of the neglect of the Democratic Labour Party. On that day in August of 2017, an entourage of ministers and officials from different service organizations, fire service, police, defense force, I mean, there were scores of them in Speightstown. And the residents of Speightstown will tell you that after that walkthrough and after that photo opportunity, nothing was done. The people of Speightstown still live in fear whenever the rain falls, still are in a position where they do not look forward to the rainy season. And this acquisition is a significant step in getting us to the point where people in Barbados can live like human beings and can live with the security that a government is supposed to provide for the people that it leads and the resources that it manages. Speightstown is an interesting place, Mr. Speaker. There's an extensive gully system that leads into Speightstown. Some of the oldsters will tell you that there are about 5 or 6 different gullies from as far as Indian Ground, Portland, Pleasant Hall, that all feed in to Speightstown. So rain that falls in Portland comes down through Ben Hill into Ashton Hall and reaches Speightstown. Then you have, if you are going south, you get to Mount Breverton, and that is a gully that leads water into Ashton Hall, into the Wim Gully, and into Speightstown. And then there's Sailor Gully, which takes water from Indian Ground, Fort Hill, Lonesome Hill, through Sailor Gully, into the Wim Gully, into Speightstown. And then there is the gully in Worley, between Whitehall and Worley, that also feeds water into the Wim Gully and into Speightstown. And then there is Richmond Hill, where water comes from Rock Hall in St. Andrew, through Mangrove, into Richmond, and into Speightstown. And then as far as the Honourable Member was from St. George South was indicating just now, from as far south as Baker's Village, because Baker's Village is where when you pass the village is where the land then slopes down again, and that water goes into Mullins. But from as far south as Baker's Village, that water comes back to Haymans, goes down through Farm Road and into Spikestown. So Spikestown is a collection point for large volumes of water from right across the highlands of St. Peter, and in some cases going in to St. Andrew. Because of that, Farm Road, which leads into what we used to call Scantlebury River, right next to the north of Cobblers Cove Hotel, that water from Farm Road, and then the Wim Gully, which feeds into the area that this resolution speaks to, have been two large conduits of water that have really impacted Spikestown negatively over the years. And there are a number of reasons why there are negative impacts. We know of what has happened in agriculture, where the land now is not absorbing the kind of water that it used to. The suck wells in cane fields along the way are not being maintained, they are not retaining the water, and there is a large volume of runoff that goes into Spikestown. There's also the issue of illegal dumping. Before we get to that, as it relates to suck wells, I really want to make an appeal to plantation owners to recognize that suck wells play a very important role for our country. They address the matter of water runoff and therefore potential flooding, but they also speak to our water supply. Because when the water is trapped, then it can find its way to the aquifers and allow us to have decent water supply. Because in St. Peter, not necessarily in Spikestown, but we have had over the years water shortages at certain times of the year. These suck wells need to be maintained, and plantation owners need to recognize what I would almost call a civic responsibility, a responsibility of the country to not contribute to drainage and flooding problems, but also to see themselves as being active in replenishing our water supply, replenishing our aquifers. That is important. We are water scarce, and we cannot afford for water to be just running, in this case, into Spikestown, through the salt pond, and into the sea. The matter of illegal dumping is also one that poses some challenges. And we saw that as recently as the last event in August of last year. Because one of the reasons why Gills Terrace flooded was because those culverts on the bypass road, small as they are, when two mattresses and a couple of broken branches come to the mouths of those culverts, then the water cannot pass. Illegal dumping is a challenge, and we want to call on residents. And I know that the residents of St. Peter don't dump illegally, so they may have come from somewhere else. But we want to call on residents of Barbados to recognize that illegal dumping is a real problem. It causes challenges for other residents. And in some cases, I believe it causes challenges for those who do the dumping as well. Well, we have just removed the tipping fee, a bad imposition by a bad government that whereas it should not cause a person to dump illegally, it did. And we are, given that we have removed the tipping fee, we are of the view that the incidence of illegal dumping will now reduce. But illegal dumping is one of the issues that has affected how the gully system in St. Peter has been able to function and the resulting challenges in Spikestown. Gullies are also not being maintained. Gullies are not being cleared. From time to time, there are dried branches, trees fall, but these objects are not being removed from the gully system. And I want to commend the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, as well as the Honourable Member for St. Michael East, and the Honourable Member for St. Lucie, for starting the cleanup campaign in Barbados a few months ago, and starting in the Wim Gully. Because there are objects in these waterways that cause problems downstream. And this party, even though we have been left with very few resources by the last government, we have begun to do what we can with the limited resources we have to make sure that the gully systems are kept clean. Another related area speaks to the dams. There are some dams in some of these areas. There is a dam in the gully at Mount Brevetor. There is a dam in Sailor Gully. And there's also a dam at Richmond. Now, a dam only works properly when it is properly maintained. Dams are man-made objects. And so the neglect of recent years has taken its toll on those dams, and they have not been as efficient as they otherwise should have been. But I am happy that the Ministry of Transport Works and Maintenance has already started work in rehabilitating those dams, and that, we believe, will also help to alleviate the flooding problem in Spikestown. There is also the matter of the culvert under the bypass road in Spikestown. That culvert, in my mind, and I have to be careful here because we don't want to cast blame where blame should not go. But I think that those of us who feel that we are educated, that we've gone to school for a long time, that we have letters and degrees and all kinds of stuff after our names, and hopefully something in our brains, I would want us from time to time to take a moment and listen to conventional wisdom from the average Barbadian. I am of the view, Mr. Speaker, having lived in St. Peter and observed what happened where those small culverts are concerned, having worked in the tourism industry and worked in hotels that would have had beach work being done from time to time, I am of the strong view that too many technocrats, because they have been trained, refuse to listen to regular people. And I am not saying that every person who walks up to you with a view may have a good view or some informed view. But I am asking the technocrats in the ministries that we now lead to take some time and listen to people. It is not enough for us to believe that we have all the training, all the brains, and we don't have to listen to anybody. There is a lot of wisdom that is born of experience and length of time observing nature, observing people, observing events. And I'm really begging people to listen to people. That is what the ministry that I have the honor of leading really focuses a lot on. We call it social dialogue, but it is really a matter of engaging with people and letting us learn from each other. Those culverts built at Spikestown were highlighted by the residents in Spikestown and across St. Peter from the time they were constructed as hazards. But the technocrats with their degrees, thought that they were doing a good thing, and they have caused much distress to the people of around the town, the people of Gales Terrace, and the people of Church Street. The people of St. Peter, though, are good people, and while we get upset and angry, we do not hold things in our minds, and so we are happy that these pieces of land are being acquired so that the remedial work can be done, including changing those small culverts into something that makes sense, into something that the people of Speightstown indicated should have happened from the beginning, so that a mattress, if it happens to get away, would not block a whole drain and flood out 10 or 20 houses. There's also, and this is what is particularly the focus of the acquisition that we're debating in this resolution, and that has to do with the canal that comes through around the town from the end of Wim Gully through around the town and into the salt pond. That canal is too small. I described a few minutes ago the areas where water comes from and feeds into Speightstown. That water is expected to flow through a canal that is about 6 feet wide. It just does not make any sense. It could never work even if the culverts at around the town were properly constructed. And so this acquisition allows for the widening of that canal coming around the town, through around the town, under the bypass road and into the salt pond canal itself. It is important that that be widened because that is what takes the water, that is what allows for the water not to overflow and flood the houses in Gales Terrace. If, Mr. Speaker, you had gone into Gales Terrace on that morning, the Prime Minister, then Leader of the Opposition, Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, visited with me on that morning, you would have seen, Mr. Speaker, watermarks that would have been higher than you standing at full height. Watermarks in Speightstown on houses were 6 feet, in some cases 6.5 feet off the ground. Such was the volume of water that came through Speightstown during that last flood event. But you have a small canal that is expected to take that volume. And so this resolution speaks to the acquisition of land bordering the existing narrow canal and allowing for the phase 2 of the project as alluded to by the Honourable Member for St. Andrew, the project that is administered by Barbados Tourism Investment Incorporated. It allows BTII now to widen the canal. Hopefully, they will also deepen the canal, but the engineers will know to do that so it feeds properly into the salt pond and allows the water to go into the sea. It is important, Mr. Speaker, that this issue be addressed. It affects Speightstown, the former main town of Barbados, the first town of Barbados, the first commercial center of Barbados, Mr. Speaker, is a place called Speightstown. I say it in that way just to educate those who may not be familiar, who may be confusing the landing.
I'm grateful for the education.
You're grateful? I'm very happy that you are, Mr. Speaker. The first commercial town, the first port in Barbados, Speightstown, a place of significant heritage value to the country. And these matters that affect a town with the kind of history and heritage and significance as Speightstown become a matter that needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed for the people who live in that town, the proud people of Speightstown. It also needs to be addressed because as a heritage town, not only does it provide a good feel for those who live there, but it also provides an attraction for those we invite to visit our country. And so we have to take matters like this that affect the people who live and who operate businesses in the town. We have to treat these matters as matters of urgency. Life is coming back into Speightstown. There have been some new restaurants coming into the town. There are also quite a number of plans that we will hear about at subsequent times. Plans for development in Speightstown, development that will bring additional business, development that will bring people into the town. We know of the Beaches project at Haywoods. Beaches are one of the brands of Sandals Resorts International, and that will be quite a significant boost on top of the restaurants that are springing up across the town as we speak. There's that Beaches project. As a matter of fact, just last week, Wednesday, I was fortunate to tour a number of those sites with the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Prime Minister, and the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central, under whose portfolio town planning falls. And we were privileged we had the opportunity to visit some of those sites where there is potential for investment, where there is an appetite for investment, where because of the approach of this Barbados Labour Party, those potential investors who were not the kickback type investors, who were not the corrupt type investors, but who were holding back, they are now expressing themselves with a view of putting their money into productive endeavor to allow for the development of our country, the employment of our people, and the provision of opportunities for Barbadians, but as it relates to Speightstown, opportunities for the residents of Speightstown. I mentioned the Beaches property, and along the coast and on the land side, there are proposals for investment, and those proposals are engaging right now the attention of the Town Planning Department, the Ministry of Housing and Lands, as well as the Prime Minister herself. So I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that Speightstown, as we have outlined in our manifesto, is to be a center for heritage, culture, the arts, and cuisine. It is to be a premier area in Barbados where we demonstrate to the world some of the advantages, some of the skills, much of the talent that we have as a people. Speightstown has a long and rich history. The people of Speightstown are hardworking people who have a proud tradition of industry and a proud tradition of being good and loyal citizens. This resolution to acquire these 8 parcels of land to allow for the fixing, is the way I'm going to put it, of the drainage problem in Speightstown has been long in coming. But we are happy that we have gotten to the point where we can proceed with the acquisition and do the work that is necessary to maintain Speightstown as our premier heritage site in Barbados. And so with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the Minister of Housing and Lands, the Honourable Member for St. Andrew. I want to say to this House and to Barbados that Speightstown is coming back. The challenges that Speightstown is facing, we are tackling head on. And once we are allowed to complete the processes that we have started and are about to start, Spikestown, St. Peter, the North, and Barbados will be restored to the pride of place that where we once stood many years ago. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Christchurch West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I don't intend to speak for a very, very long time on this matter, except to highlight a few issues. First, the matter brought up by the Leader of the Opposition, the member for St. Michael West, and just to tell him that the matters that he has raised these days, with the ability of technology, I was able to reach out to the Director of Drainage immediately, and he's responded and said that he will look into both of those areas that you have asked about. You recall that we did do some work in Greenwich Road already. There are problems there. It has to do with the wells are sucking water from other places, and therefore they get filled very quickly. We're looking at whether we have to put new wells or deepen the ones there. But the acting director says that he will go back and look at it and not only fix that area, but also then the surrounding area that is affecting the school. So I wanted to use that opportunity to speak to him. Even although I certainly do not have the vast and great knowledge of St. Peter that the Honourable Member of St. Peter has, I want to assure him that the Ministry of which Drainage has become a part will continue to work every year to make sure that we keep the Wim Gully and Sailor Gully cleaned, because we recognize that those two areas are what we have to keep maintained, otherwise they cause flooding in other places. And the third thing, Mr. Speaker, is that when we go to clear the area, because the vegetation is so lush and St. Peter is that kind of area that so much green grows very quickly, within 3 months, 4 months after we clean it, surprise, surprise, you got to go back and clean it again. So it's a constant thing. And it's similar to the Constitution River. You would have seen a large D6 and D7 there cleaning the Constitution River 3 months ago. And we cleaned it from the globe, the roundabout from the globe, all the way down to the Constitution River. And you know, within 3 months, Mr. Speaker, you would have seen it, Mr. Speaker, all the bushes back again. So it is a constant thing that the ministry has to do, and we appreciate that it's something constant, and we monitor it. When it gets to a state, then we put the equipment there and we do what is necessary, because we recognize that if you don't clean these areas, the water doesn't have the path through to the sea, and then the water will always find the path of least resistance. And instead of going to the sea, it would then go into people's houses and flood the roads and so on and so forth, and we are constantly on top of it. The Prime Minister has mandated that we set up a program and she says she's prepared to legislate that program, actually, that we set up a program that drainage must clean these areas by a certain time in anticipation of the wet season, of the rainy season, whenever those come in. So we are on top of it. We are working to get all those areas cleaned. We've had some problems with equipment, but we've put a tender out, and we have another tender coming out to purchase more equipment so that we can get as much of these areas cleaned and consistently cleaned so as to mitigate all of the flooding areas that we would have. This particular area is clear from the member for St. Peter, the minister, that we have to look at those culverts, and I'm glad that this has come so that we can reduce the risk of any flooding in that Spikestown area and get that to a small. What the member for St. Peter, though, did not mention, and I remember clearly, is I think there's a place called the farm tenantry. And I remember that at one point there was a lot of flooding that used to happen in that area. Farm Road, not farm tenantry, that is right. But and I vaguely remember as well seeing on television one guy who risked his life and limb to go and save what looked like a black-bellied sheep, went into the floods to save that animal in the Farm Road. And I get the impression that comes from, again, Sailor Gully and the Wim area. and Richmond flooding, and those areas we've added on to be able to clean them and maintain them, because at the end of the day, we have to be able to protect people's property and obviously people's life, and don't want to endanger people due to flooding. Mr. Speaker, not only though does this speak about flood mitigation, and I heard the Honourable Member speak about recharging the aquifers and the dams that we built. And we've set about a program of reinstating and improving those dams, because we all know Barbados is a water-scarce country. And therefore, a lot of our time is spent looking at how do we get water back into the aquifers to do what we call recharging the aquifers. And yes, suck wells are important. Yes, dams are important. But we may have to start looking at the possibility of having actual injection wells. So harvesting the water and injecting them back into the aquifers so that we recharge them. So many times, Mr. Speaker, you're driving along and you see thousands and thousands of gallons of water rushing down a hill, rushing into the sea. That's a waste. It's a waste. We should be capturing that water. We should be capturing that water, injecting it back into the aquifer so it then can be used for us again. And it's something that we have to look at. We have embarked on, and we've put in the estimates. I don't want to prejudge the estimates, but we've put in a sum, and once the Prime Minister agrees, to have a whole drainage plan redone for Barbados. So we've identified possible consultants. Obviously, it will be going to tender, but we're looking to have the last drainage plan, I think, was done about 18 years ago. And we're looking to have a whole new drainage plan done, not only of these drainage-prone areas, but the whole of Barbados, to see how we can mitigate flooding and enhance the ability to capture rainwater and recharge the aquifers. So this is something that we're looking at. Another part of this acquisition, which nobody has really touched on, apart from the member for St. Andrew, and I have to speak about it, and it has to do with the ability to pay people after you acquire their land. This is a sore point in this country, Mr. Speaker. And I see you're responding to it, Mr. Speaker, because you know that there's a sore point in this country.
Very familiar with it, Honourable Member.
It's a sore point.
Most familiar,
And it is unfortunate. And first, let me say that I am happy and fully support that the member for St. Andrew has identified the money to pay these people, I think said $1 million for acquiring their land. Some people 10,000 square feet, 6,000, 2,000 square feet, because he quoted in square meters, but you got to multiply by 10 to get the square feet. You know, everybody don't understand the square meters, but everybody understands square feet. So I changed it over to square feet so people understand the quantums. We have to pay people when we acquire their land. Sadly, and I make no bones about it, both parties.
I remember getting paid people at market value, though.
I said we have to pay people. I'm not getting into valuations.
You said pay people.
Yeah, pay
It's
people.
not just paying people.
In the very
Is that
least,
what?
in very least, you have to pay the people based on their land tax valuation. In the very least.
That's what I'm asking.
In the very least. You know, and what is interesting, why I say that, you know, Mr. Speaker, because when you get a land tax valuation that is high, everybody complains, goes and get a valuer to value it, to hopefully then put in an appeal and bring the land tax value down. But when you get a land tax valuation that is low, nobody doesn't complain to get a valuer to go and get the land tax valuation increased so that they can pay more land tax. But they should, because if the government is going to come to acquire it, you're going to get acquired based on the valuation that you would have had. And you may have to consider getting a higher valuation as you would get into market value. So it is interesting, and it's an interesting point. But I don't want to digress and get into that aspect to it. Just to say that we must endeavor as a nation. If you take up somebody's land and use it for a public purpose, or you acquire it for whatever reason, we must, as a nation, recognize that you have to pay people for the land that you've taken up. And sadly, in the Ministry of Transport and Works, we've found about, I think it's about $20 million in land, various land acquisitions over time, Mr. Speaker, that the government has not, the last administration, a big contributor to that, has taken up people's land to widen roads, to expand roads, whatever. and has not paid the people for the land that they've taken up. And this administration is endeavoring to make wrong things right. And one of those things is we have put together that list, and we're looking to pay off all of those debts, all of those arrears, and be able to pay the people for the lands that people have acquired for various projects all through Barbados. I'm told in total it's going to be $100 million or something, but whatever it is, we have to pay people for the land we acquire, and that's why I salute the member for St. Andrew for having the funds there to pay. And I go further. I think when we do road projects in the future, rather than come in with, and this is another thing that the member for St. Andrew has done, and I applaud him for it, rather than come in with a land acquisition here, and a land acquisition there, and two land acquisitions, and doing it over a long period, which means coming to the House for small pieces of land acquisitions. We should not do it that way. And the member for Jamaica Northeast, the Prime Minister, agrees. When we're going to do a road project, we're going to put it all, the land acquisitions, all as part of the project, so that we not only know the cost of the project, the cost of the acquisition, join it all together, make it one bill, include all the land acquisitions, the whole project and everything. It's the tidiest way to do it. Because if you're going to do a project, you must know the full cost of the project, not partial cost, full cost of the project that the government will have to bear, and then by extension be able to get the financing and pay people for the land you use. Because this is only the fairest thing. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I fully support the resolution. We in the ministry will endeavour to continue to work to improve drainage, not only in St. Peter, not only in St. Michael West, all over Barbados. We have a problem in Bridgetown. We had a problem with the pumps at Princess Alice not working properly. For years, the previous administration just let them run through, and this will be 3 pumps. They were down to 1, and they could only put it on for 30 minutes. They had to let it cool, turn it off, 30 minutes. And this is what contributed to the flooding that we had in the Kirk, small, I guess it wasn't a hurricane, but I guess it was the Kirk hurricane, that tropical storm that we had. That contributed to the flooding in Chapman Lane because the pumps could not be on. There was only 1. Well, we've put forward that we're going to purchase, in fact, we've already put the deposit to purchase 3 pumps for Princess Alice, so that we have the pumps working for the people. Because we recognize the issues that would take place if we don't have those pumps working. I remember the former member for the city of Bridgetown. You know, she would often say, whenever there was a heavy rain, the first thing she would do is head down to Princess Alice to make sure that those pumps were working and working correctly. And the fact that they were not working during Kirk, I saw the wisdom in what she used to do. So, Mr. Speaker, I want all members, and I want by extension the people of Barbados to understand that the Ministry of Transport, Works and Maintenance is looking for the problems, looking for solutions, and implementing those solutions. And once we get the support of the Parliament of Barbados to get those funds necessary, we will put those solutions in place. And to the Honourable Member for St. Peter, we look forward to getting that program done, and then your people will be able to sleep comfortably without thinking that you'll be waking up in water. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged.
Honourable St. Lucie.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to support this resolution, and my contribution will not be perhaps as long as the member for Christchurch West, but the one thing that I would say is that I am very, very familiar with these areas as a man from the north. I can well recall and I understand when the Honourable Member for St. Peter speaks about the fear that would have arisen in the mind and the heart of that resident from Gills Terrace who awoke to find water all around. I spent much of my early years in the parish of St. Peter, in the constituency, especially within that area, as I had the opportunity to receive my secondary education at the university on the hill called Coleridge and Parry. And for much of my early working life, from about 1980, I spent some 12 or 13 years at a business establishment there in the Spikestown, in the center of Spikestown on Queen Street. So I would be very, very familiar, both in terms of from my school days and from my early working life, with what would have happened and things that would have happened in St. Peter. Indeed, such things come to mind. The floods of 1984, and there were two, come readily to mind because I was in that particular area, especially for the second such unfortunate event. And Mr. Speaker, we have been, as a country, in most cases, fortunate not to have this kind of total devastation and loss of life, especially when we have these events such as flooding. The floods, perhaps, that I recall, and this was my worst fear in my childhood, was in 1970, when as a youngster living in Pike Corner, I saw water climb a bridge that was probably about 20 feet or more high. I saw water surround the place where I live. The front of the road flooded, the back flooded, and you felt as though you were that it was the end of time coming. And I began, and we didn't have any sort of evacuation then, you know. There was the floods of 1970. And some of us will be very, very familiar because there were floods all across Barbados. October 2nd, the Honourable Member for the city says to me, but I don't remember the date, but I know it was 1970, and I know how I felt when I stood in the living room and got up on a chair to peep through the window to see how the water was surrounding the house and what was happening.
I remember two well-known footballers drowned in that flood in Queen's Park. Two footballers used to play for Raymond Fields, yes. Yeah, Chuck Berg, yes, too. Yeah.
So we are familiar with these experiences, and that's why I refer specifically to the experience when the Honourable Member for St. Peter spoke about the lady rising, getting up and finding water around, because it would have been most terrifying then, if it was terrifying for me as a youngster, to actually watch the water rise. It would be even more terrifying to actually wake up and find that sort of water around you. We know of experiences in Holt Town. At Sunset Crest, I spent a couple of years in my working life there as well. I know the experience of seeing the sun shining, but yet in the Sunset Crest area, flooded, and not a drop of rain having fallen in that area, water coming from St. Thomas, and flooding in that particular area. So it runs off St. Thomas and spares the Honourable Member for St. Thomas the agony, but creates problems for other people down the road. So this points us, though, Mr. Speaker, to one main thing, and we have been doing some work, because as you look at it, Holt Town was experiencing a problem for many years, and under the Barbados Labour Party, we were able to fix or remedy that issue quite significantly. So it says, the record is there, quite clear, that BLP administrations are focused on fixing issues, things that bother, things that humbug the people of Barbados. And hence we have this resolution here today, Mr. Speaker, sir, to assist and to make the lives of the people of St. Peter better, so that they don't have to fear every time the rain set up, so to speak. We've been able to fix the whole town, Sunset Crest area, to a large degree. And as you heard the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, we have the drainage unit within our ministry has been returned to our ministry now at this point in time. And that unit has its work cut out. It is unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that we would have found a situation where there were some 10 to 12 skid steers and trucks belonging to this unit, which was supposed to be doing work across Barbados and had been parked for some 2 years or more, which has led to the situation where obviously we were handicapped in terms of doing the kind of work that ought to have been done. But we have come, Mr. Speaker, sir, and we have put plans in place, not just in terms of replacing equipment, but putting actual plans in place to work on the behalf of the people of Barbados to prevent such things as flooding and so on. Because the clearing of gullies is important. The clearing of gullies is important. But what is equally or more important, Mr. Speaker, and the message that must go, and the message that I want to send today to the people of Barbados, whether you're from St. Peter, whether you're from St. Lucie, whether you're from wherever. I heard the Honourable member for St. Peter say the people of St. Peter don't dump illegally. And he would say that. I am not going to say who dumps illegally or not. What I will say to every single person across the constituencies, stop the illegal dumping. I did a tour, Mr. Speaker, sir, of one of the constituencies. I wouldn't call the name. But I saw fridges, stoves, as the vehicle was passing a particular gully. Fridges, stoves, mattresses, just dumped. And you know, if we dump illegally or indiscriminately, we are going to create issues down the road. And people must understand that the environment belongs to us as Barbadians. It is our environment. And it is important for each and every one of us to take care of the environment. And because something you do today, it may not affect you today. But who knows what will happen tomorrow? You may be the person that become a victim of your own doing, of your own actions. So it is important that we stop the illegal and the indiscriminate dumping of garbage, whether it be furniture, whatever we'll be bringing soon the styrofoam cups and all these kind of things that people, and you can see it even in Bridgetown. Even in Bridgetown, as you look or when there's a lot of wind and so on, you see what causes the drains to be blocked. You see people from the ministry cleaning, Mr. Speaker, sir, and if you see what they bring up and put alongside the road, it is because of the indiscriminate dumping of persons, of us as Bajans. And so I want to appeal from this honourable chamber today, Mr. Speaker, sir, let us protect our environment and stop the indiscriminate and illegal dumping of garbage. Now, the drainage unit, as I was talking about before, we are working on putting things in place to schedule cleaning of the various drains and gullies and all across Barbados, because this is very, very important. But I also want to send another message to the people of Barbados across communities in Barbados. Do not sit and wait for the government to do all these things that will affect you. I remember, Mr. Speaker, sir, as I grew up and as a young man, we came together in community groups, in little organizations and so on, groups a Saturday morning or Sunday morning, and we debushed areas, we cleared gullies, and we worked because we saw it was our community. Our communities were important to us, and therefore we look after them. Do not necessarily sit down and wait on the government to do the work. I am happy that in my constituency, I've been approached on more than one occasion by some youngsters who want to clear the roads, who want to do some work in their community, beautify their community, make their community look different. And they've approached to get equipment, to borrow equipment, not for me to give them, to borrow equipment to assist them in doing that, because they have said it is our community and we are going to take care of it. And they want to encourage Barbadians across all the community, people across all the communities in Barbados, to come together at some point in time, 2, 3 hours, 4 hours, and in some instances, us as members of Parliament as well. Roll up our sleeves, and I know that we are very capable, Mr. Speaker, of doing that. Roll up our sleeves and work with the persons in our communities to keep the constituencies clean and tidy and free of any hazards that may come in terms of when you have a lot of rain and such like. Because even when you have a lot of rain and the place is not clean, you may not be affected, Mr. Speaker, sir, by the flood waters, but you are affected by the mosquitoes that will come after. So therefore, you need to do some work and assist the government, because this is our land. It does not belong to BLP or DLP or any honourable member. It belongs to all of us, Mr. Speaker, sir. And I want to encourage Barbadians to work together in their communities for the betterment of one and all. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to, as I have stated, I want to support this resolution. It is a step in the right direction where this government is moving to assist or to fix the issue, another issue that it has found, to make life better for the people of the constituency of St. Peter. And today it is St. Peter, and as we go on, we'll be getting to other constituencies where corrective action need to be taken, and we will be doing that, Mr. Speaker, because Barbados belongs to each and every one of us, and we want lives to this party's motto, a better life for our people, and we will create that by not just by words or not just by a logo, but by our very actions, Mr. Speaker, sir. I am obliged to you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to give a brief contribution to this debate. Resolution before the House is seeking permission for the compulsory acquisition of 8 parcels of land, which amount to 39,670 square feet around the town's Spitestone, St. Peter. And I want to commend the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew, the Honourable Minister, for moving with promptitude to ensure that we right a lot of wrongs in this country, Mr. Speaker. And as the Member of Parliament for St. Peter alluded to ensure that what was lost in the last decade, that Barbados have the opportunity to benefit from serious, prompt, and sincere governance. And Mr. Speaker, when they say lost, I mean it in a literal way, Mr. Speaker. And I have a new acronym, Mr. Speaker, for lost, because it is that the last administration seek to leave out the simple things. And Mr. Speaker, you have to start by recognizing that you have to get those small things right and perfect those small things, because the only way you can get the big and the macro picture, the only way you can get that to affect the lives of Barbadians is if you start with the small things. And I'm saying that these things that we are doing, that we are moving with dispatch to ensure that Barbadians benefit from, should have been corrected over the last 10 years. And Mr. Speaker, it's amazing that the only big thing that the last administration seek to do is to be big in sorcery, because money was missing and up to now we can't find it. So I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew, my friend, the Honourable Member, responsible for housing and lands in this country, rural development, I'm glad that he has made this resolution a part of the discourse. Mr. Speaker, let me speak about land acquisition as it relates to flooding. And when you look at the big picture, Mr. Speaker, flooding has a lot of consequences. It affects people's lives in a lot of ways. There's a social impact, Mr. Speaker. When families are displaced, Mr. Speaker, there is a psychological impact. There's hurt, there's trauma. Mr. Speaker, there's physical and infrastructure damage that impact the lives of Barbadians. Mr. Speaker, there is emotional damage. And last but certainly not least, there's an economic impact to flooding. And Mr. Speaker, when we recognize that as a country, we always hear about the problems associated with the lack of water in rural Barbados. One could not imagine that we are faced on a yearly basis with the issues of flooding. I am glad that not only Member of Parliament for St. Andrew, but the Minister responsible for transport and works and maintenance, my colleague from Christchurch West, that he have recommitted to ensuring that the drainage facility and that the networks across Barbados, that they are cleaned on a regular basis, and that every effort will be done to ensure that drainage is a priority where that the water, because it's amazing that we are having flooding on a regular basis in this country, and yet still the aquifers which are thirsty for water cannot be quenched. It is an amazing thing. And I'm saying that, how can we be having a conversation about flooding when in rural Barbados? And I heard the Member of Parliament for St. Thomas, I heard your side, but when she can tell you about the old people in her constituency, the people she seeks to represent, who can't get a bucket of water to bathe with when the morning comes, I am saying something is wrong. And this matter should be corrected, Mr. Speaker, over the last decade. If you really care about people, because when you talk about sustainable development, when you talk about development in this country, when we talk about moving the landscape to one where we develop it for housing for people, you have to have a conversation about people. You cannot develop infrastructure. You cannot have a development as it relates to all these vertical structures. And when you're talking about houses and development of the sea, unless you involve people. And as I said before, the small things, Mr. Speaker, matter. And we have to get those things right. We have to ensure that there is water supply for our aquifers, so when there is the dry season and when there's drought in this country, that those persons can go and turn on their tap and receive a constant flow of water like anybody else in Barbados. And I'm saying, I am glad that the Member of Parliament for Christchurch West, that he has recommitted with all the sinew of his being to ensure that our drainage situation, that is corrected, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we have to look at the economic impact of flooding. It costs governments a lot of money, Mr. Speaker. It's not whimsical and frivolous. Flooding impacts economies across the world. Mr. Speaker, not only the displacement of family and the danger to lives, but the economy. And I heard the Member of Parliament of St. Lucie, the only female parish in this country, a fertile parish, talk about waterborne illnesses. The stagnant water that is left behind from flooding, Mr. Speaker, is a natural habitat for mosquitoes and other, which can cause, Mr. Speaker, waterborne illnesses. We hear about the rise in Zika and dengue fever across this country. These things have an economic impact on the lives of Barbadians and the existence of this country. And more so now than ever, Mr. Speaker, we have to make sure we save every dollar and make sure it redounds to the benefit of every citizen in this country. And Mr. Speaker, developments in this country, housing development, land development, must look at a feasible way of ensuring that the landscape is used so that water runs off in a way that understands gravity and understands movement, where it runs to fill the aquifers. Because that's the conversation you must have with the developers. Where is the water going to go? oftentimes we see developments coming in the environments, and we often wonder, do these persons that construct these buildings, do they have a conversation with the children in the district to understand what is the normal flow, where is the normal flow for water? Because you will be shocked to see that some buildings are right in the path of major water flow, and that diversion of the water, Mr. Speaker, could be responsible for a lot of flooding that we are having. So I'm saying that the design and the architecture for buildings and for construction must take into consideration the flow of water and seek to minimize flooding in this country. Another conversation which we must have, Mr. Speaker, and I intend as Minister of Youth and Community Empowerment to lead the charge, because I have already spoken to my new youth ambassadors, and we will move, Mr. Speaker, with dispatch to ensure that there is a conversation with every single young person in this country as it relates to proper garbage disposal. There must be a serious anti-littering campaign in this country, and it must be championed by the young people of this country, Mr. Speaker. And to this end, Mr. Speaker, I recommit this ministry and this government, because the country can only be as good as its citizens. And we have to understand that the citizens of this country must respect the country. And I see the member partner for Christchurch South, he started a campaign of separation of garbage. And it's a very good campaign that he started in his constituency, where we look at recycling our products and separation of garbage. And it makes sense, and they would like that to be teleported across the length and breadth of Barbados. Because the way how we treat our garbage, Mr. Speaker, ultimately determines sorry, Mr. Speaker, the way how the other things are in terms of infrastructure, in terms of flooding, in terms of development. It affects all of those things, Mr. Speaker. And I am saying that there must be serious conversations as it relates to the disposal of garbage, as it relates to how we construct our buildings, as it relates to development across the length and breadth of this country. And Mr. Speaker, although we are talking about St. Peter and land acquisition to minimize flooding out there, Mr. Speaker, I am saying to the good people of Christchurch West Central that I will move with very connective tissue to ensure that places like Caneville, when we had the last tropical depression, some people call it Hurricane Kirk, but the only hurricane I know that my colleague from from St. Michael South, the only damage he did was on May the 24th, and I'm happy that that hurricane came to Barbados. But Mr. Speaker, we have flooding in Caneville, in my constituency. And I'm telling the residents of Caneville to hold tight, because I just heard the words of the Member of Parliament for Christchurch West. I know that he, as a pious individual, a consecrated man of the cloth, that his word is his bond. And I know also that the devil is a liar and he is not the devil. So, and he's a biblical man, Mr. Speaker. And I trust that the residents of Briar Hall, on Briar Hall Main Road and across by the pasture, that those residents who complain bitterly every time there's a little rain, every time the conditions get nebulous, and they're fearful that there's flooding in that area of the constituency, I am keeping and holding my colleague from Christchurch West to his word. And I am saying to you, Mr. Speaker, those residents in Gore Hill who are often affected by flooding, I'm telling them as well to hold the word of the Member of Parliament of Christchurch West close to their heart. And I'm saying to the members and the constituents in Caneville, those in Vauxhall and Silver Hill, that I will do everything to ensure that flooding is a problem of the past or the last decade, and that we as a government, that we will do every single thing to ensure that we right the wrongs in this country, starting with the simple things, Mr. Speaker. And I am saying that along with ensuring that there's proper infrastructure, and that there's vibrancy in terms of ensuring that there's proper drainage units and that the unit is working on behalf of the good people of this country. I am saying to Barbadians, you have to play your part. I heard the member of St. Lucie alluded to it earlier. It is important more than ever that every single Barbadian put their hands to the plow to ensure that we become a successful nation. And we have to play our part in terms of how we dispose our garbage. And I know, Mr. Speaker, as I speak now, the Member of Parliament for St. Michael South and the member and the Right Honourable Member that is responsible for the blue economy and the hydrosphere, I know he had a concern about the amount of plastics that are going into the ocean. Those plastics didn't get there because they drop out the stratosphere or thermosphere. They came, Mr. Speaker, because, and I know, Mr. Speaker, you are a lexophile of sorts and you understand the words that I use. But, Mr. Speaker, they came because of the same flooding, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the same flooding that we are trying to prevent. That's how the plastics and the foreign material get into the sea. And then you hear about the dioxins that seek to affect the reproductive systems in our body, and when you hear about the hormonal idiosyncrasies in medicine, when you hear about the problems as it relates to the new forms of cancer, those are the dioxins that are derived, Mr. Speaker, when we consume the fish from the sea and the marine and our marine products that feed on these same dioxins, Mr. Speaker. I am saying to you, Mr. Speaker, the albatross, a bird that was revered in the 17th century, Mr. Speaker, with the German fishermen. When you see albatross flying around, you know that fish has to be around, and that was the only mechanism used at the point in time so you can recognize the fishermen got all type of devices, advanced devices, technological devices, where you can scope and know which part of the fish. A youngster with a cell phone can tell me which part of the fish is in Trinidad, not the flying fish though. But, Mr. Speaker, I am saying that you have to protect our oceans and we have to protect our economy. We have to protect our ecosystems. And I know the members in rustic Barbados, the ones in St. Joseph and St. Andrew and St. George, my good friend here for St. George South, will tell you that there is no better view, panoramic or otherwise, than to see the beautiful gullies. And our tourists come here to see them too. The tourists ain't come here to see our beds and our stores and our fridges in the gullies. They come to enjoy the rustic nature and the idyllic nature of Barbados. And I'm saying that, Mr. Speaker, when you have garbage and flooding, because when there's flooding in the country, Mr. Speaker, as I said, there's technology. And with a press of a button, the news can travel as far as Europe, China, any place, Mr. Speaker. And I'm saying, as a tourist destination, it is important that we treat to these things with a measure of promptitude, Mr. Speaker. We have to ensure that we do everything to attract our tourists here. And when where there is flooding across countries, that may be the single most reason to dissuade tourists from coming to our shores. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, this is not the ideal situation in Barbados. Tourism is our business, Mr. Speaker. Let us play our part. And I am encouraging every single Barbadian to play their part to ensure that our wells, our aquifers, that the water that is right now traveling into the sea, that is wasting, that we do everything to ensure we catch that. And that each one of us, not dependent on the government, Mr. Speaker, because, and I will repeat the words of the Prime Minister, it takes all hands to clap. But inadvertently, Mr. Speaker, many hands make light work, but no work make light hands too, Mr. Speaker. And I am saying, Mr. Speaker, and I will repeat, Mr. Speaker, we have to ensure that we put those hands, those unemployed hands to work. And I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, that the recycling industry, the green economy, the blue economy, those sectors can provide much needed work. Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Member of Parliament and my good friend for the environment, and I thank him for removing now, Mr. Speaker, the tipping fee. Non-onerous fee, Mr. Speaker. A fee that led a lot of the dumping in our gullies and our idyllic space, Mr. Speaker. And I am saying that the recycling industry must be seen as a business. And the truckers, I'm glad that when the truckers go to the dump, that they don't have to pay the fee, the tipping fee, which seems to tip the balance as it relates to the way how we dispose garbage in our country. And I am saying, Mr. Speaker, I congratulate the Honourable Minister responsible for the environment and beautification for his efforts thus far. I know we may not get everything right, Mr. Speaker, but in 6 months, we have worked with all the ADP that one could imagine to ensure that Barbadians, that they have not only a dream, but that dream can be realized in a country that they are proud of. And I'm saying there must be a beautification aspect of Barbados. There must be an environment where Barbadians must be able to open their windows, enjoy the panoramic view, or enjoy the rustic environment, enjoy that which tourists come from all over the world to enjoy. And they're not going to come here, Mr. Speaker, sir, if they feel that their health is threatened, that their lives are threatened. We have to provide an environment which is safe for them. And I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, this proposal by the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew has my unequivocal, unreserved, untamed, and uncut. And you could alliterate, Mr. Speaker, because I said before, you are a logo and lexophile of sorts, Mr. Speaker. To you, I'm obliged. Thank you.
Honourable Member for St. George North.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend my voice to this important acquisition in Spicetown, St. Peter. It's important, therefore, to start off from where the minister left off. The minister responsible for this acquisition spoke about compensation for the land that was acquired, that the Crown had acquired some time ago. And he did mention the fact that money was put in the vote for this acquisition, and rightly so. I think too often land has been acquired over the past decades without adequate compensation being paid to the owners. In this case, I want to congratulate the minister and congratulate the governor for putting together funds to pay the landowner, because the Land Acquisition Act is clear that the Crown shall acquire land for any public purpose. The minister responsible for lands, and public purpose will be for roads, for housing, for any purpose, in this case to mitigate flooding. And Section 11 of the Act, Mr. Speaker, speaks to the compensation, how compensation shall be paid. And that this Act is clear that I noticed that persons were looking at if it should be market value, but the Act states that land shall be claimed to be agricultural land, that unless otherwise stated. And it is important to note that once the minister has come here and has published the various sections under this act that the compensation should be paid under the land acquisition at fair market value shall be paid to the owners of the land. If the land is approved for development, then the development portion, then that portion of the land will be paid for through the market value plus any other development that was taking place on the land over time. But it is clear in the Act, and therefore I believe once these things are taken into consideration, we shouldn't have a problem. So the land acquisition, even though from time to time many persons I know, the former administration, one person in particular, had mentioned that there's a need to revise the Land Acquisition Act to specify not market value, but land that was valued in accordance to land tax valuation and other valuation, which to my mind is not a clear scientific way. I must say that valuation has varied over time, and as I was saying to my member here for Christchurch South, that valuation is not a scientific in terms that values differ, and we have to look at that very carefully. But it's important that the owner, as long with, especially if you're doing a private treaty, the owner get together with the Ministry of Housing officials to determine the value. But values can differ from time to time. But a claiming compensation has been a problem over time. I know that in the Ministry of Housing and Lands, a number of parcels still remain because owners sometimes do not agree, and that has been very contentious over time. Some persons die and go along, and the money is still with the Crown. In the case of one tenantry, I know the Lower Estate tenantry, for example, that was being developed, that was acquired by the Crown in 1995, and it was plantation tenantries. The owner at the time wanted market value, but then the government could not, the Crown could not pay more than the 10 cents because that was the value of the land. So values have been bone of contentions over time, and it remains a problem. I am aware of two parcels that were acquired in my constituency, for example, the Hamlin's land and the Constant land that were acquired over 10 years ago, but the owners have not been compensated, not because the Crown did not meet. The problem is that the owners felt that the land was worth more than the values that were attached. So values have always been, Mr. Speaker, a bone of contention. And there are many attorneys out there who sometimes do not understand the values as well. There are a number of persons in the valuing business who sometimes do not get it right. And we have a problem. And I am aware of these things, and I'm sure the minister is aware of a number of these things that have to be done. But of course, Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy that the owners of this land have accepted the values that are being placed, and it will be good if this can happen. I know of a case in the Christchurch East constituency, I think it was near the airport, when it was the government of the day agreed that compensation, we would not look at compensation in terms of the market value, but we were looking in terms of replacement value. That was another. I think that particular acquisition was a special one where we had to uproot an entire community because of the airport, and persons were were allowed to move to Leadville, Christchurch, where we give, at the time, compensation based on replacement value. And replacement value sometimes can be very high. So that this particular aspect is important. And I think it is necessary for us from time to time to explain this section to many persons who do not understand that the government has the capacity to acquire any parcel of land. The Minister of Housing is the most powerful minister of the Crown because he can acquire any parcel, but of course the only thing that is necessary is the act of compensation. But how compensation is paid, it is determined by two parties basically getting together, but of course it has to do with the agricultural aspect of the land. If you cannot show that the land has permission for development. I want to move on though, Mr. Speaker, to look at this whole question of flood mitigation and low-lying areas. And it is important for us to make the point that land in flood-prone areas we need to look at very carefully. And I think Murphy Passer in the city of Bridgetown and the Orleans, these are areas that cry out for long attention. We have started, and I know that one government started a program there. It was not completely thought through, and it was left hanging by the last administration. But we were doing things in the Orleans and to upgrade houses, and I kept saying all along that we need to continue to look at a holistic program, not only for the urban corridor, but the wider St. Michael. I've always felt, I'm not an urban representative myself, but I frequent St. Michael quite frequently, if that is a term, frequent quite frequently. This means I'm always
to lend your support to the honorable members, sir.
Yeah, I'm always in the St. Michael area, especially in the area of St. Michael West, Brewster's Road, Lonnabour's Towers. Yes, I know the areas very well. And Mr. Speaker, but the point is, we need to look at a number of these low-lying areas to see how we could improve these areas. And I think that the Minister of Housing, along with the Minister of the Environment, need to really spend some time looking at how we can relocate a number of these derelict properties, how we could improve these things to the upliftment of people. And there was a time when we had an inventory of over 1,800 derelict properties in St. Michael, derelict properties alone, where people had died. I believe the properties, some of them are not paying taxes, but we were looking at a program at a time where these properties could have been handed to the government to redevelop these parcels of land. And in such, you will be able to modernize and improve these areas where persons can acquire either through long lease by government or some other methods. I guess the lawyers in here can tell us what the best method of getting some of these properties into the hands of a number of would-be homeowners. But there are still a number of derelict properties. I remember one such property was in the Bank Hall area that has now been demolished, and it is beautifying. If you look around the Central Bank, Mr. Speaker, as I speak, there are two derelict properties to the west of the Queen's Park property, right on Crumpton Street. That needs to be taken over by the Central Bank. It's right and overlooking the Central Bank, and there are properties if you go through Robert Street, all through Robert Street, there are some properties that can be modernized. Within the area of Brewster's Road, there are several parcels that need to be debushed and modernized as well. And people have been complaining about a lot of rats and other vermins and all types of things that, to my mind, the government alone cannot do. I know we have asked the environmental department, which is under the Ministry of Health, but of course they do not have the resources, Mr. Speaker, to do all these things. They really don't. And I like the suggestion that was made by the member for St. Lucie that we need to encourage people to beautify. We need to encourage groups to come out on weekends and help to debush and provide opportunities for persons who are living nearby to live more in comfort. Because a lot of people, I had a resident who called me quite recently from the Rose Park area to say that he has to compete with the rats and the monkeys and all types of things because a property that was next door to him, that the owner has gone away. He has called on the environmental department, but they do not have the answer to these things. And people ask the question many times, Mr. Speaker, if you leave a derelict property or if you leave your property unattended, what happens? If the government cleans this property, are we still attaching the bill to the tax of that landowner? I do not know. I do not know. I know there was a time when we heard that a landowner who has gone away and left his property unattended, or even if he's here in the island, because there are several landowners who claim I buy my property for my daughter or my son in a developed area but refuse to clean it, who buy the property for investment, do not clean the property, and the next door neighbor or the people who have built homes have to struggle. And especially at Christmas time when everybody wants to have a clean environment, you have to now live with a derelict property next to your home. These are things, Mr. Speaker, that we need to get it right. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, that we have to ask community groups, we have to ask people who are willing to help demolish the bush, to help clean a number of these properties. I also believe, Mr. Speaker, that the Ministry of the Tourism Ministry can take a number of properties and help develop for the tourist industry. I understand that the Tourist Development Fund is still available for the development of recreation areas, for the development of green spaces, for the development of areas that can be beautified as parks. All these are things that can be done through the development fund. And I hope that the ministry responsible for tourism and the environment can come together to look carefully at how these areas can be developed all across the country. We have spaces that can be developed for tourism and for community development, for sporting development as well. There are a number of areas that can be, you can put a small hard court. In our time, Mr. Speaker, we took up a few parcels to develop small hard courts for communities, and this is something that we can do at this point in time. I understand it is difficult because we don't have the money, we don't have the resources, but clearly a number of parcels can be taken up for recreation, for culture, and for other sporting event, tourism related. We can do a number of things in some areas. I feel and deeply believe that this is a way to go in order to modernize our country to keep our country refreshed as we go forward in a developed society, it is important for us to look carefully at how we build out our society in terms of for health relation and of course to do a number of other things that are important for the development of our society. Mr. Speaker, it is also important for us to look carefully at, I heard members talk about illegal dumping. Illegal dumping is something that it seemed to be part of our cultural experience over the past, I would think, 20, 30 years. But there was a time when, before that, our foreparents cleaned their surroundings and cleaned gullies. I know there were gullies in my area where we were able to play, we were able to move through nice plants and health-related plants. We were able to do these things. Today, persons are not using the gullies now, they're overbushed. And whenever you have overcrowding of bush and derelict properties, people tend to throw all types of things into them. Any sort of bush, persons know, some persons who take it on themselves, and it is a growing concern, Mr. Speaker, that most modern Barbadians are now throwing things all across in any derelict field that you find. Anywhere you have bush, people throw old beds, old fridges, stoves, bottles, all types of things, and you know they get away with it. And this is some of the problems that the member for St. Lucie was speaking about. We need to look at this very carefully. How do we do it? How do we encourage people not to throw their dump stuff all over the place? I guess it has to do with the cost of transportation, the cost of going to the dump. And of course, this has been now corrected, and I hope that more and more persons, I hope that the Ministry of Sanitation Department especially would come out and take out some of the bulky waste from across the country. I understand, Mr. Speaker, that trucks and all types of other vehicles are not available, but we hope that within the not too distant future that we can see us return to a situation where garbage collection would be once or twice a week. That's another problem that we have, and I'm hopeful that we can have more collections over time. And we want to encourage Barbadians, especially at this time, to store their bulky waste in a way that it wouldn't affect their neighbors. We want to encourage them to do this sort of thing in order to protect our environment and to show a clean place. Only quite recently, I had to go to the airport and to pick up a friend coming in from overseas, from the U.S., and person was delighted. Barbados looked clean around the highway, and I am very thankful that the Ministry of Transport and Works and the Environment got together to clean the highway in recent times. Highway looking a little different than it was 6 months ago, and we are happy for that. But we have to continue to look not only at the highway, but within the community. There's still a number of communities that are not experiencing collection every week, and I hope that the sanitation department can move together to work together with the communities to ensure that at least once per week, garbage collection is undertaken. I believe that this would help or reflect our country. We have to be able to promote good environment. We have to be able to promote our country. If tourism is our business, Mr. Speaker, then we have to lend not only our voice, but also our hearts. We have to lend our labor force. We have to lend whatever we can, and we want to not only rely on some groups, because I know that there are a number of groups that try to help the cleaning up of the environment. We have to be able to lend not only from this Parliament, right across Barbados. We want to call upon civil society to help do what we believe is right for our country. It is important that we send this message right here, especially at this time of the year. So that this acquisition, Mr. Speaker, is important. This acquisition is important, and I want to ask the Minister, really, to negotiate, open the negotiation for the Hamlin's land again, because I know the owners who have been complaining, they have been complaining that they haven't been compensated over 10 years. The time is right. I understand they had some difficulties in terms of accepting the compensation at the time, but I hope, because the owner is getting old, he is now almost blind, and I want to appeal to the Ministry of Housing to look at this particular acquisition at Hamlin's land. It was acquired for housing, and we want to be able to ensure that the owner is compensated and that we get on with the development of the land at Market Hill in St. George. So I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we want to salute the Minister and ask that we, in the future, all future acquisitions be done in this way, where you budget for the property, and in so doing, I believe that owners and attorneys who represent the owners will be happier in terms of agreeing willingly for these lands to be acquired. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm obliged. All right.
Honourable Member for City of Bridgetown.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this resolution, further consideration of this resolution, be postponed.
Second that.
Question is that further consideration of this resolution be postponed. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. You think the ayes have it? This consideration of this resolution is thereby postponed. Honourable Member for the City of Bridgetown.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the following. Severance and Unemployment Contribution Validation Amendment Bill 2018, Occupational Training Amendment Bill 2018, Severance Payments Amendment Bill 2018, National Insurance and Social Security Amendment Bill 2018, and a resolution to move the passing a resolution to approve the amount of $53,878,819 as the amount to be granted from the Consolidated Fund and be placed at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2018-2019 as shown in the supplementary estimates.
Mr. Speaker, first reading of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the following bills: Severance and Unemployment Contribution Validation Amendment Bill 2018, Occupational Training Amendment Bill 2018, Severance Payments Amendment Bill 2018, and National Insurance and Social Security Amendment Bill 2018.
Question is that the aforementioned bills be read the first time. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I am commanded to lay the Severance Payments Fund Contribution Amendment Regulations 2018 and the National Insurance and Social Security Collection of Contributions Amendment Regulations 2018.
Back to side.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the House be suspended until 6:25 p.m.
Question is that this honourable chamber be suspended until 6:25 p.m. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. This honourable chamber is suspended until 6:25 p.m.